Hello, so today I'd like to talk a little bit about a poet called Gerard Manley Hopkins. Okay, so as for these other little videos I've been doing, I want to talk about him briefly in regard to sort of mental health, mental states, and that kind of thing. And Gerard Manley Hopkins to me is very, very interesting in that way. So he was a Victorian poet. He lived between 1844 to 1889, so only lived till the age of 45. He's well known now, much more well known now than he was during his life, as one of the foremost nature poets, religious poets, and he's also very well known for the use of language. He was using a technique that became known as sprung rhythm. We're not going to go into the grammar of poetry, but his use of words was very, very unusual. The way he uses words is wonderful. So just if anyone was just reading him as a poet, he's absolutely a wonderful poet to read for his use of language. He's quite hard to start with, and he often pays for several readings. So to start with, I'm just going to give a flavour by reading one of the poems of his that I quite like. It's called Spring. It's probably not his most famous poem, but it's probably one of the top 20 that's anthologised. So this gives us a flavour of his love of nature and his religiosity. Nothing is so beautiful as spring, when weeds in wheels shoot long and lovely and lush. Thrush's eggs look little low heavens, and thrush through the echoing timber does so rinse and ring. The ear it strikes like lightnings to hear him sing. The glassy pear tree leaves and blooms, they brush the descending blue. That blue is all in a rush with richness. The racing lambs too have fair their fling. What is all this juice and all this joy? A strain of the earth's sweet being in the beginning in Eden garden. Get before it cloy, before it cloud. Christ, Lord, and sour with sinning. Innocent mind and Mayday and girl and boy. Most, O maid's child, thy choice and worthy the winning. You can see from that he starts with kind of, to me, the first verse is a nature poem, and then the last verse, which is often the case with him, in my opinion, he then brings in the religious side to it. I think he sees nature as the most wonderful thing that God has given us. You could also see from there that he's actually quite hard to read. If you want to hear someone really lovely reading him, go on YouTube, and there's people like Richard Burton and Samuel West who read his work. Okay, so Gerard Manley Hopkins, brought up in England in a Protestant household, but when he was in his early 20s he converted to Catholicism and became a Jesuit priest. This, according to the biography I've read of him, which is very, very good and very detailed, and which a lot of what I'm talking about, what I know of him, comes from this book. Probably the conversion to be a Jesuit, caused him some kind of guilt and some possible altercations with his own family. In terms of kind of psychology and how we might analyse Manley Hopkins in modern terms, I want to mention a couple of things. Firstly, he has this idea, he came up with this word called Inscape, which is possibly derived from his understanding of a medieval philosopher called Duns Scotus, but he created this word, and it meant to mean the internal being of any living thing, by which he means not just animals, but trees, for example. And alongside his use of this word Inscape, so he felt it was the way that God had made every single living thing to be unique. So even a tree had its own Inscape, or this bush would have its own Inscape, which was unique to it. I kind of was reading recently about this word called empath, which is a word I'd never heard of until about the last 10 years, but it seemed to become a thing. An empath being someone who's acutely sensitive to the feelings and needs of other people, often will take on their pain. And I'm wondering, when later on, when we go on to later Hopkins, I'm wondering whether he wasn't so oversensitive that this caused some of his, later sort of desolation, really. But an example of the Inscape, the empathy, he when a time he was in Oxford and there was the walk he used to do, and there were some poplars, and they were cut down, and he he describes in some of his notebooks, which you can read from, how acutely he felt the cutting down of those trees, almost like he was feeling the pain of these trees being cut down. And we shall read a little bit from a poem he wrote about them, which is called The Binsley Poplars. So I'll read the first 3 lines to get an idea. My aspens dear, whose agey cage is quelled or quenched in leaves the leaping sun, all felled are all felled. And verse 2, oh, if we but knew what we do when we delve or hew, hack and rack the growing green, since country is so tender to touch, her being so slender, that, like this sleek and seeing ball, but a prick will make no eye at all. Where we, even where we mean to mend her, we end her when we hew or delve. Aftercomers cannot guess the beauty been. 10 or 12, only 10 or 12 strokes of havoc unselve the sweet especial scene, rural scene, a rural scene, a sweet especial rural scene. So he's describing there about these trees being chopped down and the delving and the hewing, and how can we not see the pain that's part of that whole process. Now, let me have a quick look. There's God's Grandeur book, page 7. This is early Hopkins, I believe. This shows Hopkins, these couple of lines here show Hopkins at his most joyous in terms of his love of God. It's called God's Grandeur. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil. And there's the next poem, The Starlit Night, again full of joy. Look at the stars, look up at the skies. Oh, look at the fire folk sitting in the air. The bright boroughs, the circle citadels there. Down in dim woods the diamond delves, the elves' eyes. The grey lawns cold where quick gold lies. Wind beats white beam. I think that's all upbeat words, all joy. I want to contrast that to his later life. Now, towards the end of his life, he'd moved to Dublin and had a period of what we'd call now depression, really, quite deep. And we're going to read some of the poems that he wrote in that period. Now, he's famous for 4 or 5 poems that have become called the Terrible Sonnets, okay? Not terrible but they're bad, but terrible, frightening. I am just going to read a little bit from the biography, because I think the biography can explain it much better than I can. So from the biography, a description of the sonnets. This was the first mention of the group of 5 or 6 sonnets, usually known as the Terrible Sonnets, or more exactly, the Sonnets of Desolation. The best of Hopkins' poems had heretofore sprung out of the certainty of his religious belief, but these frightening sonnets are the expression of a doubt so profound that it can often find comfort only in the belief that death may not be eternal salvation, but utter and welcome annihilation. To be accurate, they do not reflect doubt of the existence of God, but a belief in something far more terrifying. The certainty that he exists, and an almost equal certainty that his mercy does not extend to the poet himself, or that he is unaware of the individual or careless of his fate. That's a description of them, and now we shall read a little bit from them to get a feeling of what they are like. So, like all Manley Hopkins poems, they always start, the first couple of lines of every Manley Hopkins poems are just mind-blowingly powerful, I always think, anyway. So we're going to read one whole one, but read a couple of the first lines of another one. Carry and comfort, I'll not carry and comfort, despair, not feast on thee, not untwist, slack they may be, these last strands of man. In me, almost weary, cry, I can no more. Here's the first couple of lines of one of the other sonnets. I wake and feel the fell of dark, not day. What hours, oh what black hours we have spent. And here's the full one, the full one of his sonnets. I think he wrote, like I said, 4 or 5. No one knows for certain which order they are written in or which order you're meant to read them in. Anyway, this is one of them. No worst, there is none. Pitched past pitch of grief, more pangs will, schooled at 4 pangs, wilder ring. Comforter, where is your comforting? Mary, mother of us, where is your relief? My cries heave herds long, huddle in amain, a chief woe, world sorrow. On an age-old anvil, wince and sing, then lull, then leave off, fury had shrieked, no lingering, let me be fell, force I must be brief. Oh, the mind has mountains, cliffs of fall, frightful sheer, no man fathomed, hold them cheap, may who ne'er hung there. Nor does long our small durance deal with that steep or deep, here, creep, wretch, under a comfort serves in a whirlwind. All life, death does end, and each day dies with sleep. A couple of words I want to say about that second verse, which I think is so kind of quite scary. Oh, the mind has mountains, cliffs of fall, frightful sheer, no man fathomed. I picture a mind, a person in a state of some despair, some desolation, and the feeling, the mind, the soul, has these sheer cliffs, and all you can do to these sheer cliffs is fall off them. And it's quite a, you know, the way he uses those terms there, I think, powerful. If that is not a amazing but bleak exposition of someone in a state of desolation, I don't know what. And that's what I want to end this on now. But we do want to say how wonderful much of Manley Hopkins' poetry is. That is, you know, that stuff there is a description of depression. Now, that's it for today. We've stood out in the rain. This is the first rain we've had in England for heavy rain for 4 weeks, so we haven't been able to go out to my normal field. Thanks again to my son Ned for doing the video, and thank you to anyone who's listened.